dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. I am one of those who've had the good fortune since 2003 of participating almost in every version of Vibrant Gujarat. The first one, which was held in an auditorium in the city, and of course, as the state has grown, as Dr. Adia was mentioning, the vibrancy of this conference also has grown. Though it's today branded as Vibrant Gujarat, but unquestionably it has become the foremost economic conclave to be held in India. It showcases both the Indian economy and the progress of Gujarat. We last met here in 2015 for the 7th Vibrant Gujarat. And at that time, the government was in the process of implementing several incremental reforms. If we look back at 2014 and the few years before that, and compare it with the vibrancy we saw from this dais yesterday, we can make out the huge difference which has taken place in India. Not very long ago, just about 3 years ago, India was considered to be globally a part of the fragile five. The five economies which were considered extremely fragile. We had fallen off the global radar. Policy making had become extremely difficult. Direction was uncertain. And the political economic debate, rather than how to grow, was more concerned with where we had been going wrong. Our macroeconomic data also was not very inspiring. And I think a decisive political change which took place in May 2014 brought about many significant developments thereafter. You had a decisive leadership of the central government. And it's now absolutely clear that in order to rebuild the economy, you not only need bold decisions, you need courageous decisions, and you need to have a stamina also to overcome transient criticism of decisions which comes. If you lack in either of these qualities, then you can give routine governance, but never leave your footprints behind. And of course, we saw a series of initial changes. Some of them were low-hanging fruit, and some were obviously directional in nature. Indian economy got opened up significantly. And while we were opening up, in sector after sector, it became clear that India and Indians had become increasingly aspirational. And therefore, most of these decisions, let alone faced no resistance, quite to the contrary, they enjoyed popular support. a new India had emerged, and which is evident from the fact that while the world is moving slowly today, and you hear voices of protectionism in developed world, the debate over protectionism is hardly heard in India. And that's an indication of how aspirational, open and progress-oriented Indian public opinion is increasingly becoming. People expected transparency. So one of the emphases of the government and the Honorable Prime Minister was that discretions had to be eliminated. In fact, a lesson to be learned from the last government, the previous UPA government, was that in matters of distribution of economic privileges and largesse, when governments and ministries enjoy discretions, they inevitably land you in controversies. And you spend your political tenure fighting those and firefighting those controversies, rather than being able to use the resources available with the government. Now, having taken a series of those steps, India came back on the global radar. Our macroeconomic data started looking up. And I think time had now come to clean up the table and take several important decisions, each one of them, if you link it with one another, added to the strength of the Indian economy. And I think the year 2016, which has just ended, became extremely important for that purpose. For how many years have we debated that our monetary policy must be decided by a committee? We implemented the law, we've amended it, implemented it, it's now in execution. India did not have an adequate exit law. And therefore, the speed at which we enacted and had it approved and set up the institutions under the insolvency and the bankruptcy law, the whole exercise got completed within the calendar year last year. Since 1996, we had been repeatedly negotiating and renegotiating all the treaties, the double taxation avoidance treaties with countries, which in effect were facilitating round-tripping of money. And during the last calendar years, we renegotiated and rewrote the Mauritius Treaty, the Cyprus Treaty, the Singapore Treaty, which was a part of the government's larger desire that the shadow economy should not be allowed to prosper. It took a considerable amount of effort to build up consensus to pass the constitutional amendment on the goods and services tax, which we were successful in passing it in Parliament. After every budget, you heard academic debates about rationalization of subsidies. For decades, not a single step had been taken in that direction. Last year saw the Aadhaar law being passed, being implemented, and significant steps in many areas using the facility of unique identity to rationalize subsidies, in effect considerable savings, and target the benefits only towards those for whom the benefits were conceived. And then, of course, came the Prime Minister's important announcement and decision on the 8th of November with regard to the replacement of the high denominational currency. And if we look at a number of these steps in totality, and de-link them from each other, analyze each one of them and then collectively analyze their impact, where are they going to lead India over the next few years? Obviously, difficult decisions initially pass through difficult phases. Historic decisions which have long-term advantages to the country can also have a temporary transient pain attached to them. But then, in the medium term and long term, are they going to change the roadmap on which the country is destined to move? We have to honestly admit that on one hand we claim to be a society which is aspiring now to evolve from a developing country into a developed country. We aspire to be an economy which is making an impact globally, and we pride ourselves in calling ourselves the fastest growing major economy in the world. But at the same time, we are substantially, in terms of taxation, a non-compliant society. Many of our commentators, columnists in developed countries who've had the opportunity to comment on these decisions in India analyze it from a point of view of their experience in societies which are substantially tax compliant. And therefore, a number of these steps which have been taken are going to be significant because they are going to change the pattern in which India and Indians are going to live and spend in future. It's going to have an impact on the course of our present and future lives. The impact of demonetization, if I may divert from the GST subject for a moment, can't be de-linked from this. Excessive paper currency has its own vices. It leads to its own temptations. And we've seen the impact of that in India. When we release data, which Dr. Adia has been repeatedly emphasizing, we then realize the narrowness of our tax base itself. And once this entire bearer currency, which has anonymity and no history, moves back into the banking system and is accompanied by a digitized economy, which the Honorable Prime Minister spoke about yesterday, it is going to be a major step towards an integration of the informal economy, which at times also was a shadow economy, with a more formal economy. This itself is going to increase the transactions which are covered within the banking system, transactions which can lead to higher revenues in the future, make us more compliant, and give us a cleaner and a bigger economy itself. And after the transient impact of this is over, once it is coupled with the historic implementation of the GST itself, which has its own advantages. We are living currently in a regime which is where the central government taxes you for manufacturing, it taxes you for services, the states tax you for sale of commodities, the sales tax you for luxury, for purchase, for entry, and you are assessed by different authorities. So economically, India is not one big entity. When the GST merges all this and makes India into one entity, it leads to a seamless transfer of goods and services across the country. It's an advantage to the assessee in as much as there is no cascading effect of tax. His goods can move around. He gets the benefit of input credits. It's good for the states because it will eventually lead to larger revenues. And it's good for the economy as a whole. The GST Council is a body where there is deliberative democracy in action. It's India's first federal taxation body, where all these are now being worked out. Most of the issues have been sorted out. Some critical issues remain. And these critical issues, I hope, over the next few weeks, we will try and solve out. And once it is implemented, a combination of a more digitized economy with a more efficient tax system, I'm sure will make India look much better. It will make our economy look much cleaner, much bigger. And I'm sure Indian industry, Indian trade, Indian assessees, and certainly Indian states will eventually cooperate and make these two moves to be highly successful. Thank you very much for having invited me for this program.
Thank you very much, sir. Gujarat National Law University and Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, they have jointly prepared a Vibrant Gujarat Law Book on policy and regulatory framework.